Well, tonight we are once again back in Deuteronomy 15 and finish up this chapter. Last week we got through the first 11 verses on the issue of giving and generosity. And of course, every 7 years they had the year of release. And then of course, every 7 times 7 was supposed to be the year of Jubilee, where everybody's land went back to the original allotment given way back in the time of Joshua. But every 6 years, all debts were canceled and the poor would have a chance. As we look at other passages, it seemed like it was a year that the poor could reap the land, the widows and the orphans could take. So you could go out and pick an apple from your tree and eat it, but the poor could come in and pick a whole bundle of apples and sell them at the market. So it really was a year, not just everybody's debts were canceled, but for the poor to have a year to get financially on top once again before the next set of 6 years went by. And so really there would be no poor. That was what it said, that there should be no poor. But then it ends in verse 11 very pragmatically saying, but the poor you'll always have with you, because I don't trust that the nation will obey me, but I also don't trust the individuals will obey me. But he said it's a test. Are you going to have an open hand joyfully? Or are you going to have a closed heart greedily? And Jesus said it all comes down to one of two things: God or mammon, money. You love the one, hate the other, cling to the one, despise the other. And again, the Proverbs is full of verses how the greedy person will never have enough, but the generous person, his soul will always be full. Well, now we come back, and we're talking now not about the 7th year for poor people, but we're now talking about the 7th year for slaves to be set free. So set up on the 6th and then the 7th. So it seems like maybe there's a pattern here. 6 days and then the 7th, 6 years and then the 7th. Do you guys think there's a pattern of 7s in the Bible at all? Boy, to sit around with Jesus and Einstein and Elon Musk, I hope those guys, I don't know, and to try to figure out the mathematics of God's mind in these things, it's really interesting. But it's very much a mathematical thing of how he breaks down numbers. So we come to verse 12, if your brother. So he's not talking about the Gentiles that have come to live in the land. So we saw this last week. He said, if somebody owes you money and it's the 7th year, and he breaks it down between foreigners and aliens. Foreigners are those who are living in the land that they do not want to be Jews. But then aliens were people that were proselyting themselves into Judaism. So it did apply to the aliens who had proselyted themselves into Judaism, but it didn't apply to the foreigner. So now we're talking not about slaves that were captured in battle or this kind of thing. We're talking about people that have become slaves that are fellow Jews. He says something interesting here. He says a Hebrew man. We don't find this word very much. And the meaning of that word, Ibri, I-B-R-I, we say Hebrew, I have no idea why, but it's Ibri. I can't do the guttural, so you have to go listen to it on the Google or whatever to hear how you pronounce it correct. But they have no idea what it means. They just say the guy that crossed over or the guy that came over. Some people say it's describing the guy that came over the Euphrates River, referring to Abraham who came into the promised land. So he came from yonder way, crossed over the Euphrates. But we have no idea. Some say he was a camel rider, very offensive. In the Arab culture, you don't call somebody a camel jockey without expecting to get in a fight. So I don't think it meant that. But then he also says something interesting here in this chapter 15. He says, a brother who's a Hebrew man, or notice the next thing, a Hebrew woman. Now, up to this point, we have not heard that about a woman being a slave. But they were. We knew they were slaves. But once again, the Bible is making male and female equal. So you would have expected in a more pagan society to say, well, the man every 6 years he gets to be free, but the woman, yeah, she has no rights. She's a slave forever. We don't care about her. We don't care about her rights. Not so. In the Hebrew culture here, it very much cares equally as much about the woman's rights. So either the man or the woman here, very unique, is sold to you and served 6 years. Then in the 7th year, you shall let him go free from you. And when you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. You shall supply him liberally from your flocks, from your threshing floor, from your winepress, etc., etc., etc. From what the Lord your God has blessed you with, you shall give to him. You shall remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you this thing today. So we come back and we say slavery existed. And slavery was a way to rectify somebody who got in debt in this culture. Now, as you look at the slavery, and as we look at it tonight, we go into other verses, it didn't seem like slavery. We're using the word slavery here. I think the word that we would understand it better is like an indentured servant. Do you remember that when people came over from Europe? They say, man, I got to get out of here. And some rich guy would say, I'll give you the money for the passage for you and your family on the boat. I'll even buy some land over there. But you're going to go over and you're going to farm it. And outside of getting a little bit to eat for yourself, the rest of it's mine for the next umpteen years. And so really the guy could come over to America and never get away, even though he farmed and was prosperous, he could never get ahead because all the prosperity went back to the guy that spotted him the money at the beginning. So he was an indentured servant. I don't think it was very kind. I think it was rather lazy or lousy that a person would do that. But beggars can't be choosers, right? And sometimes you would rather be in indentured slavery than stuck over in Europe getting killed, which was the case. So you ask the question now, how could a person end up in such extreme poverty that they get sold into slavery? Well, one way is they get in debt and poverty. Remember back in Leviticus 25, verse 39 to 46, he says, if one of your brethren who dwells with you becomes poor, sells himself to you, you shall not compel him to serve as a slave. There it is. As a hired servant, as a sojourner, he shall be with you, and he shall serve you until the year of Jubilee. And then he shall depart from you, he and his children with him, shall return to his own family, he shall return to the possessions of his fathers. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over him with rigor. You shall fear God. For as your male and female slaves, whom you have from the nations that are around you, for them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of the strangers who dwell among you, and their families who are with you, which they beget to your land, and they shall become your property. And you may take them as the inheritance of your children after you, and you inherit them as a possession. They shall be your permanent slaves, but regarding your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule over you one another with rigor. So people say, oh, here's the Bible, creating slavery. No, we've talked about this. God, in the law, bent the branch as far as he could bend it without breaking it. So he gave concessions. He knows there's going to be slavery. He knows people are going to, the whole idea of employee and employer and people working for you and paying them a salary, this kind of idea didn't exist yet. So you had people that owned stuff and everybody else were slaves, basically. And you see that all the way up to Jesus' time in the Roman Empire. So it exists. But then God comes in and he builds it in such a way that it would stop existing. Just like you can have more than one wife. But we're going to discover here in the weeks to come, it's going to repeat it. But who got everything when the guy died? The wife that was least loved. Her children got everything. So your other wives that you love the best, and everybody in the community is the one who decided. Who gets it? Well, I think he treated that wife less lovingly than the other ones. Well, her kids get everything then. So what are you going to do? You're not going to have multiple wives. That's what you're not going to do. And in the same way, the Bible's a realistic book, and it's accepting the reality. Just like he says, there should be no poor in the land among you. Last week we saw that. But in verse 11 it ended going, but you will always have poor among you. You shouldn't if you do things the way I'm saying, but you're not going to do things the way I'm saying, at least not all the time, so you will have poor among you. And so the same here, he's saying that people that get into poverty and to get out of poverty, they can sell themselves. Now, we do have more information in the history of the Jews on this. So a person might give into poverty because he becomes a drunk. He might get into poverty because he just becomes lazy and doesn't plant his field or, weed his field or water his field or take care of it so he doesn't have good crops. And he doesn't do that, every year. He sort of half-heartedly plows and throws some seed and just is a bad farmer, or doesn't take care of his sheep and his sheep die. He's not a good person. So the idea of the slavery was to put him under the care of one of the elders. Now, in the Jewish community, not just anybody could own slaves in this way of their brother. It was typically a community elder, and everybody's watching him, and everybody's watching the scenario, and he is treated like a family member. So this guy who was a horrible husband and a drunk, well, try that under the hand of your master. He's not going to allow it, okay? Now, as we saw earlier, you couldn't beat them, you couldn't scar them. If you did hurt them, they were free the moment you hurt them. Remember, we covered this before. So there were some real built-in safeguards, but yet there would be 6 years to disciple them, basically. Another reason was, we learned in Exodus 21, that a man may sell his daughter into a home with the intentions that she eventually marry into that family. You were a lower caste system. By getting your daughter into a richer household was a way for her to better themselves. There are many people today in our world that would prefer to be slaves in another country than to stay stuck in their country. I've been in a few Arab cultures, and you go to the hotels there, and they're all Indians from India, or they're all Filipinos. I had one hotel, they were all Filipinos there, and I got to talk to some of the ladies, and she hadn't seen her kids in 5 years back in the Philippines because she basically couldn't get enough money to go home, because her money she would make, and she would send it back home to the Philippines so her kids could go to private school and do better. And it's like, if I could write you a check right now to fly you home, would you go? It's like, no. I need to stay here and keep working. This is the best thing I can do for my family at this point. Was it good? No. Is it the best you could do? Yes. So we read in Exodus 21, verse 7 through 11, if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign person, because she has dealt deceitfully with her. And if it has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three things for her, then she shall go out free without paying money. So you got this beautiful poor girl, and of course, in the caste systems of the world today, even today, it's hard to want somebody to marry down, okay? To want to marry somebody. I lived in Costa Rica in Central America, and there, they don't hide the racism there. Racism is just a fact. But the more white-skinned you are, you do not marry a dark-skinned person. You do not. And so if you are in poverty and you're more of light skin, then you have a chance to marry up. But if your dad became a wealthy business guy and you're very dark, you'll be able to marry a lighter tan girl because the wealth will help you to make your kids a little lighter than you are. This is a system that was important to them. And again, it's a reality. So a guy to do best for his daughter is to get a dowry, sell her to this guy, and hopefully she'll have a better life. And he basically says in the Judaism, if for some reason this girl comes and your son doesn't want to marry her, or the guy doesn't want to marry her, then they can't just say, get out of here, go back home. Well, nope, can't be done. And then the third way is in case of bankruptcy. Remember in 2 Kings 4, a certain woman of the wives of the son of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and a creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. So this widow woman said, basically, my husband, who was one of your prophets, by the way, he died in bankruptcy, and now they're going to take the funds that he owed and make my sons slaves. And he has to rectify that. Another reason is a thief. In Exodus 22, 3 and 4, it says, the sun has risen on him. There shall be guilt on his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then notice, he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it's ox or donkey or sheep, he shall restore it double. So you got to pay 4 times the amount or double if you still have the goods with you. But if you don't, you got to become a slave. And so notice here, again, this is not like the slavery that we had in America and most of the world today. It's more like a life. It's not a lifelong servanthood. You're not a slave forever, and if you try to escape, we're going to catch you and beat you or kill you. No. The slavery was chosen. It's a mutual arrangement. It's like, yep, I need to be a slave for a while to get things right. It was a limited duration. He knew it's 6 years. And then it was highly regulated, like I talked about. It was not... nobody really knows what goes on over there at the farm. He's got a bunch of slaves and you go over there and they're in tatters and being beaten and starved. And no, the whole community is aware of what is happening. It's a part of this culture. And then, again, we do know if the guy was married or had a family, then he also had, he couldn't take them with him. There were certain things that could happen where he could get them eventually, but typically he had to also work more time to be able to get his family to come with him. So 6 years. But after those 6 years, was he just kicked to the curb? No, we learn in verse 14 there, in 15 it says, you shall supply him liberally from the flocks, from your threshing floor, from your winepress. What the Lord has blessed you with, you shall give to him. So notice, first of all, the whole community is paying attention here. And they're basically observing what's happening. And if you would, on a peer pressure or social pressure, they're observing what kind of manner he is treating his fellow Jew, his fellow brother. And so the more this guy is generous in giving, the greater his reputation would be. But typically, the slave is very happy with the end of the 6 years of what had happened. And in most situations, not only is he out of debt, but he's leaving slavery fairly well off. This is the point. After 6 years of slavery, if you would, his back salary is being given to him all at once. Let's think of it that way. I mean, I've asked before, how many of you guys would be willing to do that? And it's like 90% of the church raised their hand going, I'd sign up for that. And I said, how many of you guys are in the military? Like that. And I said, you did sign up for that. It's just not so liberal when you leave. But I have talked to people who sign up for the military, and I'm like, okay, is God giving you permission to do that? It's like, what do you mean? I said, well, you're putting yourself into slavery for the time you're in the military. You're not a free man. If you're, a year into the military and you decide to go be a missionary somewhere, you can't. You got to be where your master, the government, tells you to be, when you're to be there, and what you're to do, and when you're to do it. And you're not free until they release you. And that could be 4 years, or, if you have to do a period after your allotted time, you may get brought right back into the military. Even though you're out, they still have hooks to bring you back in sometime later if they so choose. So they are to be taken care of in this type of slavery. So it's not oppressive. So the whole time you're a slave there, you realize this is something I've got myself in. Maybe not your fault. It may be because of sickness. It could be because your dad got you into debt and died, and you got stuck with this farm and all this debt. I mean, there's other reasons, but yet they realize, yep, this is my allotment for the next 6 years. But there's sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, if you would. I may not like the job, but I only have it for 6 years. I may not like being here, but I'm going to go out generously, compensated when I go back to my farm and to be able to have cattle and grain and seed, and I'm going to go back better than I ever was before, right? And so it's interesting when we think about this, because there's so many different angles to this. When we realize that all the Bible is a picture of the substance in Christ. All the Bible is a picture of the substance of Christ. So who are we? We are people in debt, right? We're all in debt. We were all a people who had a debt we could not pay, right? Spiritually, in the spiritual realm. And if you would, the only way out of this debt is to submit ourselves fully to the will of our Master. And of course, in the New Testament, we see how Christians who were literally slaves needed to say, I'm in the Lord, whatever circumstance I'm in. That's faith. It takes faith. We're going to be studying Hebrews 11. It takes faith to just say, whatever circumstance I'm in, God knows it. And my life is short. I lost my leg. I'm going to heaven pretty soon. I can't see very well. I can't hear very well, which is most of you, and including myself. We're going to heaven pretty soon. Whatever lot we're in, it's okay. God's greater. There's no coincidences in God's kingdom. God didn't forget about us or drop the ball, did he? And so Paul in the New Testament explains in Galatians 3:27-29, for as many as you are baptized into Christ are put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. Read it with me there. There's neither slave nor free. Neither male nor female, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and according to the promise. So we're all children of Abraham. Whether in this life we're slaves or we're free, whether we're poor or whether we're rich. Now, it's interesting that in the New Testament, some of the slaves became pastors of the slave owners. And as we look at history, this is a big part of what ended slavery in the Roman Empire. And in the little book of Philemon, remember that story where the slave of Philemon runs away, Onesimus? And, there's no coincidence in God's kingdom. He runs into Paul in Rome. Paul leads him to Christ. And he's like, yeah, I want you to be a part of this team. You're called to ministry. And then he finds out that he didn't settle accounts correctly with Philemon. He ran away. And it looks like he stole some money on the way out the door. And he said, you got to go back to Philemon and make things right. And so Paul writes this letter. And he basically says, you're not getting a returned slave. You're getting a brother. And something far more than a brother. You're getting a pastor who's actually going to be an authority over you spiritually in the spiritual realm. And Philemon 1 there, for perhaps he departed for a while for this purpose, that you might receive him forever, no longer a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother, especially to me, and how much more to you, both in flesh and in the Lord. And then you count me as a partner, receive him as you would me. Wow, a spiritual leader over him. And then slaves also, they had a tough calling, keeping their eyes on Jesus, but they were required to not concentrate on their lot in life as slaves, but get their eyes on the Lord in their slavery. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, 21 to 24, were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can be free, rather use it. If you can get out of slavery, go for it. But if not, don't worry about it. For he who called you in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freeman. Likewise, he who was called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called. Paul says we're all slaves. Now, if you could not be a slave of man, that'd be better. But if not, you're a slave anyway. Because we're all slaves to Christ. Right? This is the point. He's like, either you're a slave of just God or you're a slave of God and man. But either way, we are all slaves. That's the point. The point of this, that our heart is set to be that lowliest of servant. Who's the greatest in God's kingdom? The servant, literally the slave of all. Who did Jesus come to be? Jesus came to be the servant of all, the slave of all, the lowliest of slaves. So Christ in the flesh was the lowliest of slaves. So in Ephesians 6, verse 5 through 8, he says, bondservants, well, think about that for a minute. Be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart, as it is to Christ. So notice here, he starts off by saying, forever slaves. Now we're going to see this in a minute. If a slave decides after 6 years to stay a slave for life, he's called a bondservant. So he calls Christians bondservants. Hey, you're slaves. Hey, brother slaves. Hey, brothers forever slaves. If you happen to be a slave of a man, he says, serve him as if you were serving Christ himself. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. Now, this is a big pill to swallow, isn't it? I mean, especially if I'm not a slave and I'm telling a bunch of slaves to, have a great attitude and, get their eyes on the Lord and your reward will be in heaven. It's a big pill to swallow, but yet that's the lot. And I think probably most of us have been in a job we hated and we wanted to quit, and God says, you're not quitting until your attitude changes. I've had a couple of jobs like that. It's like, I'll just quit. And God's like, no, you're not. You are going to have the right attitude, and then we'll talk about you getting another job. I've had that a few times, and then I come back and I'm like, okay, doesn't matter what this company is or what my boss is or it's nobody's fault but mine. And I need to humble myself and let God do the work in me until I, with joy and working hard, serving them as if I would serve Christ, and not just so they can see me, but even when nobody's around, I'm doing A++ job because I'm working for this person as if I were working for Christ. And whether they pay me what I should get paid or not, Christ is going to reward me ultimately for having the right heart in this job. Well, the next thing is we find that slave owners are also to have a correct response. In Ephesians 6:9, he says, "You masters, do not do the same thing to those giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him." So you're going to have to give an account as a master to slaves, to Christ, your master. So you may be a master, but you're not at the top of the pyramid. God's at the top of the pyramid. So you may think, I can do whatever I want. I'm in charge. I own this company. I run this place. I can do it. No. You're much is given, much is required. And one of the things you're going to be accountable to is how you treated those under your authority. Colossians 4:1, "Masters, give your bondservants what is just and fair, knowing that you also have a master in heaven." So now we see where by the time you get to Colossians, it's almost like they're getting paid. And they're getting food allotment or clothing or education or the care for their kids. And it's like, hey, you need to be a good employee to these quote-unquote bondservants. Well, now in Deuteronomy 15, in verse 16 to 18, as it happens that he says to you, so at the end of the 6th year, "I will not go away from you because he loves you and your house since he prospers with you. Then you shall take an awl and thrust it through his ear to the door, and he shall be your servant forever. Also in your family's servant you shall do likewise. It shall not seem hard to you when you send him away free from you, for he has been worth a double hired servant in serving these 6 years. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all that you do." So notice here, the master doesn't have a choice. If this guy decides to stay, he can stay. He has all the power. At the end of the 6th year, the guy's like, "Here's everything. All right, see you later. You're my neighbor now." And the guy's like, "No, I love this. The best version of me is having to be submitted to you." And remember another passages on this. The servant was to become like somebody of your own household. You were to treat him like your own son. So in many cases, after 6 years, it's like, this is my family. I don't really have anybody closer than this. I want my next holiday to be here, like here, not me out there on my own house. And so the best, maybe he was a drunk. And now he's been sober and he mistreated his wife. Now he's been forced to be a good husband. Maybe he was not a very good dad, but now the master taught him to be a good dad. And his wife and kids are just growing and doing so well, and he's doing so well. And he's like, "No, I don't want to be not under your hand of submission. I want to remain under your hand of submission. The best version of me is to be a bondservant." In Exodus 21, verse 5 and 6, "But if your servant plainly says, 'I love my master, my wife, my children,' I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring to him the door to the doorpost. His master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever." So it isn't just about him. For my family's sake, for my wife, for my kids, for my community. And then the judges, so the whole community is in on this. So now he goes to the community leaders, and his master's with him, and he's like, "Hey, I want to make a community thing." And it was probably a bit of a community event. The whole community showed up. And there he is with his wife smiling, his kids are smiling, he's smiling. It's this joyful thing. And after him walking through the city with the owl in his ear, it wasn't like, "Oh, there's a slave." There is a very honorable man. And he is a man who is submitted in life for the best for him, for his wife, for his kids, for the community. It was something that was seen honorably. So the whole community would go to this guy's front, to his house. And there, the community leaders are there, and the judges, if you would. And in this event, he takes the owl and whack, right through the ear, I don't want to get my ears pierced. And I would be terrified in the days going up to getting my ears pierced. But I guess people do it either way. But, and you go back in cultures, getting your ears pierced or tattoos or these kind of things was a lowbrow thing to do. When I was a kid, if you had a tattoo, it's because you were either a sailor or you were in prison or in some biker game. It wasn't because, you're a multimillionaire YouTuber. They didn't exist. But anyway, it was this very honorable thing. And this is where we need to come to understand this is who Christ is. And this is who he saw himself as and how he views us. Even though we're his servants, we submitted to him as the servants of Christ, but yet he sees us as family. He sees us as friends. Right? In John 15:15, no longer do I call you servants. Isn't that interesting? I'm not going to call you guys slaves anymore. I guess he did, maybe. When you look at Paul, I don't think they went around, hey, Apostle Paul, hey, Pastor Paul. I think if there's what do I call you? Call me Bondslave Paul. That's my favorite title. That's when you look at his letters, that's the title he wants the most. I'm a servant of Christ. I'm a bondslave forever. So no longer do I call you slaves, for slaves does not know what his master is doing, but I call you my friends. For all things that I've heard from my Father, I've made known to you. And so we come to that place. Are we willing to take up that cross, if you would, an owl through the ear, to say, I love you, and I forever want to be your servant? You see, I think a lot of Christians have not come to that place. I think people that believe in Jesus, but they've not had that moment of sanctification. They've not had that point in their life that says, I'm no longer my own. My hands are God's. My feet is God. My life is God's. My life is God. Everything is God's. I am, for me to live is Christ, right? And to die is gain. I am, and there's that moment in time. Can you remember that in your walk? When you're like, being a Christian isn't enough anymore. Going to church isn't enough anymore. Knowing the truths of the Bible isn't enough anymore. I just want to consecrate myself to you. Just to give my life. I remember one pastor that touched me when I was a teenager. But when he was in junior high, the pastor was speaking on sanctification. He's like, if you want to give your life totally to God, come up to the altar here, And this young kid, he didn't quite understand that, they come and kneel at the altar. I grew up in a church. Any of you guys went to a church where they had an altar, you'd go kneel it? So, but this young junior high kid, as soon as the pastor said it, he jumped out of his seat and he ran down. You know how they have the little altar, and he just laid on top of it in the middle of the altar area that went across the stage. And he just laid there like a sacrifice, And one of the elders had to say, get off of there. But he had it right, didn't he? Give ourselves as a living sacrifice unto God. This is a moment in time that this guy, he's like, man, it's already 4 years, 5 years. Him and his wife and his kids are talking. It's like, do we want this to change? I don't want this to change. And then probably 6 months out to the end of that 6th year, he's like, I'm not going anywhere. And the master's like, well, do this for a few more months before you leave. And he's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. Matter of fact, I'm digging deeper. I'm not only not leaving somewhere in 6 months, but I am committing my whole rest of my life to you. It's a special time where a Christian can come. And when they do that, then they have the relationship as God, as our family, as our friend forever. I love that about Abraham. Abraham, the Bible says, was a friend of God forever. What was Abraham's claim to fame? He was a friend of God. And what's our claim to fame? We are bondservants because of that. Do you imagine that master ever wondered in the future about the loyalty of that servant? Is that guy still in for me? Is he really loyal to me? Is he stabbing me in the back? Do you think that bondservant would do any of those after taking that out through the air? I don't think so. In the same way, there's that place of complete surrender. Jesus, I believe, came to that. In Psalm 40, verse 6, the psalmist prophetically said, "Sacrifice and offerings you did not desire. My ears you have opened. Burnt offering and sin offerings you did not require." Of course, we quote that in Hebrews also. But this prophetic message of Christ, where Christ says, that's me. More sacrifices, bulls and goats you didn't want. But I brought, in the volume of the book, I brought my body to you. And my body I brought as an offering. And then you opened my ears. Maybe he's talking about hearing more clearly. I don't think so. I think he's talking about this very thing. I became the slave of all men. We see it plainly in Philippians 2, right? Verse 5 through 7. "Let this mind be in you, which also was in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a" what? Bondservant, "and coming in the likeness of men." In the New Testament, this seems to be the title that people coveted. In Romans 1:1, Paul, a bondservant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God. Yeah, the apostle thing, that's just down the road. My main claim to fame is I'm a bondservant of Christ. James, the brother of Jesus, a bondservant of God and our Lord Jesus Christ. Wow. 2 Peter 1:1, Simon Peter said, a bondservant of the apostle of Jesus Christ. Jude, another half-brother of Jesus. Jude 1:1, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, and the brother of James as well. And so we are encouraged to live for Christ in this mindset. Remember in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19 and 20, "Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? You were bought at a price." Do you see the reference to slavery there? "Therefore glorify God in your body and your spirit, which are God's." You are no longer your own. You have been given over to a bondslave. You're now Christ's slave. And you need to understand that, and that'll help you to win over sexual victory that he was talking about there. In Ephesians 6:6, "Not as eye pleasers or men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ." All of us, whether we're slaves of this world or not, we are bond slaves of Christ. Do the will of God from the heart. Colossians 3:24, "Knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ." 1 Peter 2:16, "As free, yet using your liberty as a cloak, not using your liberty as a cloak of vice, but as" what? "Bondservants of God." Well, Deuteronomy 15:19 now. We're going to head over to the firstborn. "All the firstborn males that come from your herd and your flock, you shall sanctify to the Lord your God. You shall do no work with the firstborn of your herd, nor shear the firstborn of your flock." So these firstborn males that you're giving to the Lord as a sacrifice, they need to be without spot and blemish and so forth. You won't ever work them. We're going to find out here that you may not be able to sacrifice them. You may not be able to give them. They're not good enough to give as a sacrifice. But yet, even if they're not being able to be used as a sacrifice, they have a blemish. We're going to find out here that you still can't work them. You still can't shear them. You can't say, oh, this is the firstborn, and well, it's got a blemish, but I'll shear him for a couple of years and then give him to God. Nope, it's sanctified to God. And in verse 20 and 23, you and your household shall eat it before the Lord your God year by year in the place which the Lord chooses. But if there is a defect in it, it is lame or blind or has any serious defect, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God. You may eat it within your gates. The unclean and the clean person alike may eat it as if it were a gazelle or a deer. Only you shall not eat it in its blood. You shall pour it out on the ground like water. So this particular animal, again, we're getting sort of the Reader's Digest version on this, but if it can't be a sacrifice, it's still the firstborn. It's God's. And so you can still eat it. It's not uneatable. And also the foreigner, but you can treat it like you would a deer or a gazelle. But you still need to recognize it. It's the first, and of course you would redeem it with money, we know from earlier text in Leviticus. But nevertheless, you need to recognize the firstbornness of it, the preeminence that it's God's. What is God saying here? You're not going to make it. You're not going to do well unless you understand the first is the Lord's. And the point is that you don't say, let me look to see how many I have and then I'll give God the one that I want. You're giving by faith this first one. And you may not get any others, or you may have very little left over. It may be a lot more than just, it's not really 10%, it's the first. But this was the point that he drove home with Pharaoh. And Pharaoh never got it. And he's saying, don't be like Pharaoh. In Exodus 4:22, then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn. Israel is my son, my firstborn. Why do you need to let him go? Because he's mine. And you better let go of what is mine, or it will not bless you. It will curse you. In Exodus 34:19-20, all that opens the womb are mine, every male firstborn among your livestock, whether ox or sheep. But the firstborn of the donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem him, then you shall break its neck. All the firstborn of your sons you shall redeem. None shall appear before me empty-handed. So if for some reason you can't redeem it, you can't buy it, then you just break its neck and it just, bury it in the field. But understand, it's not going to benefit you. And this is the point later with the tithes and the offerings. You've robbed me. How have we robbed you? It's mine. It was, it'd be like this. If I were getting ready to jump in the swimming pool and I said, hey, here's my wallet, can you hold it? And I go swimming around in the pool and I get out and I said, hey, can I have my wallet back? No, it's mine. No, I gave you it to hold it. It's mine. The first is God's. It never was yours. For you to think it was yours was very foolish. You hung on to it for God. But when he says it's time to give it, we need to give it. One more passage in Leviticus 22, and we'll end here. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, to all of the children of Israel, and say to them, whatever man of the house of Israel or of the stranger in Israel who offers a sacrifice for any of the vows or any of the freewill offerings which they offer to the Lord as a burnt offering, you shall offer of your own free will, with a male without blemish from the cattle and from the sheep or from the goats. Whatever has a defect you shall not offer, or it shall not be accepted on your behalf. But whoever offers a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord to fulfill his vow, the free will offering from the cattle or the sheep, it must be perfect and accepted. There will be no defect in it. That those that are blind or broken or maimed or have an ulcer or eczema or scabs, you shall not offer to the Lord, no take an offering by fire of them on the altar of the Lord, either a bull or a lamb that has limp too long or too short, a limb too long or too short, to offer as a freewill offering, but for the vow it shall not be accepted. You shall not offer to the Lord what is bruised or crushed or torn or cut, nor shall you make any offering of them in your land, nor from the foreigner's hand shall you offer any of these things as a bread or your God, because their corruption is in them and effects are in them. They shall not be accepted on your behalf. And so we come back to this point. The first is the Lord's. Which part? The best. The best. Give God the first. It is his. It's always been his. And then don't say, well, God's up in heaven, I'm on earth here, and we'll even notice it's blind. We'll even notice the limp. Will he notice that it has 3 legs instead of 4? I don't think so. As we get to the Old Testament, that's exactly what they said. It was a burden to serve the Lord. It was a burden to go all the way to Jerusalem. And the priests were like, I don't want to deal with you guys anymore. I don't want to reject your offering. So some rich guy comes up and says, here's a sheep. It's approved. Take it. And it's blind and got oozing sores. And the priest's like, I don't care. I'll just take it. And, I don't want to deal with it. And God is like, no, this is not acceptable, because it comes back to the heart of the issue. Don't you get that out of this? This 7th year of release, the 7th year the slave goes free, the giving God the first, it's a heart issue. The earth is the Lord's and all that's in it. and he is saying, this is the way it works, not for me, for you. And if we will submit ourselves to him and say, God, it's yours. The first is yours. I get it. The earth is yours. All the animals are yours. The gold and the silver are yours. It's all you. The best I'm doing it is temporarily holding it in my hand. But I understand that I am not to wrestle over these things. Whether it's the 7th year of forgiving everybody's debts, or the 7th year I need to release this great employee of mine. I don't want to let him go. And not only that, I got to give him a bunch of my wealth on the way out the door. This is horrible. No, don't make it horrible. Now let's talk about the first. Give God the first. And don't let that be horrible either. Let your heart have this joyful thing to put God first in all things. Amen? So comments, thoughts, questions on any one of the topics here tonight?